Hola, buen día, y Feliz Navidad. It is Christmas Day, and we're doing this video in Barcelona. Very different from Portland, Oregon right now, which is shut down and snowed in from a freak snowstorm, bomb cyclone thing that's been hitting the States right now. So I feel pretty fortunate that we are here in, sunny 69-degree weather just off the harbor. Let's see if we get a shot. If you saw like the masts over the trees, that's actually like a Swedish warship or something that ran aground in the 1700s, and this group of intrepid seamen and women have restored it and are sailing it from Sweden to like Southeast Asia or something, and so they're stopping for the winter here in Barcelona before, I'm guessing, carrying on and gonna sail through the Dardanelles and all of that, which is just so cool to me. But anyway, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, either celebrating or not celebrating the holiday. In any case, I hope that, everything is great on your end. So I figured, like all, self-important YouTube talking heads, that you all would care about what I consider to be the top 5 books that I read this year, and so we're going to give the people what they want. This year has been a big year for me, getting back into reading, as I'm sure it is for a lot of you as well. And so enough waffling about, let's get into it, and I really hope that all of this road noise outside doesn't mean that I'm gonna have to record this whole video again for what is now gonna be the 3rd time. The agua con gas here is pretty cool. It's called Vichy Catalan. Yeah, it's got this like mineral sort of like saltiness going on. Either that or, I'm losing my sense of taste or something. Alright, so before we get into the main list, I wanted to give a shout out to the works of Robert Aickman. I reviewed his collection of short stories, or one of his collections of short stories, Night Voices, a little while back in October, and thought it was fantastic. The reason that book did not make its way into the top 5 is that I don't recommend the actual book. Like, I don't recommend that book. That book is hard to find. It can be very expensive. And you can find, like, his short stories in other collections. NYRB has one. I think Penguin has a couple. So look for those. But definitely check his writing out. But for, like, a, top 5 of the year, that one fell a little short. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about number 5, which is Ask the Dust by John Fante. Now, I'm pretty biased when it comes to this book. It has a lot of things that work on like a personal and aesthetic level that cause me to give it a lot of brownie points and make it very, very enjoyable for me. I'm a sucker for stories set in LA, as I grew up there. Old LA is something that's a fascination of mine. But even discounting all of that, I still think that it is a fantastic book. If you like the Beat Poets, if you like Bukowski, you're going to love Ask the Dust. In fact, Bukowski found it in the Pasadena Public Library completely by happenstance, and then for the next, 20 years of his life, evangelized John Fante and was his number 1 fanboy. He described it as finding gold in a city dump, so if that's not a glowing recommendation, I don't know what is. Ask the Dust is part of what's known as the Bandini Quartet, 4 novels written by John Fante, out of chronological order, that follow a character named Arturo Bandini, a struggling writer in Los Angeles who has way more ego than work ethic and continually shoots himself in the foot as he tries to work his way up the rung in, Hollywood and Hollywood-adjacent industries. It's funny, it's tragic. More often than not, Bandini is the butt of the joke and is the main obstacle standing in the way of his success. And so it's an absolute treat to watch this, really despicable person clutch defeat from the jaws of victory time and time again, and then just get more and more bitter throughout the book. It's great fun. I highly recommend it. Number 4 is a book that I haven't gotten around to reviewing on this channel, and actually is in fact one that I read before I even thought of starting a YouTube channel, but is nevertheless a fantastic piece of literature, and that is Graham Greene's The Quiet American. It's hard to even know where to begin when you talk about it because it's a book, like another one that we're going to talk about in a second, that works on so many levels. It's a romance story with an amazing love triangle. It's an anti-war novel. It's a character study. It's a political commentary. It's an allegory. It's a book that just works on so many levels. Set at the tail end of the French occupation of Vietnam in the late 1950s, it follows three main characters. An old, cynical British journalist who sees Vietnam and the war as a way for him to escape the, oppressive Anglican morality embodied by his estranged wife. His lover, a young Vietnamese woman who is looking for a husband as a way to escape Vietnam. And a third character, the quiet American, a wide-eyed, idealistic young man working for the CIA. The book starts with his body being washed up in a river, and over the next 200 pages, we see in flashbacks the relationship between the three main characters. We see how this naive American is a foil to the cynical British man, and how the two of them are vying for the affections of the same woman. If you couldn't tell, each of these characters is meant to personify a certain player in this whole geopolitical conflict. The woman is Vietnam, Fowler, the journalist, is Europe, Britain, and then you have the naive American who's fresh on the scene and thinks that they can shape the world to their very sort of young, idealistic, and unrealistic worldview. But if that's all the book was, I probably wouldn't think as fondly of it as I do. I've said before that I don't really enjoy books that work purely just on an allegorical level. That's because I need some of that, some of that realism. I need some of that understanding of humanity. I need them to be people first and foremost, and then stand-ins for, ideologies or, countries or whatever as a secondary consideration. And Graham Greene with The Quiet American understands this. And that's why it's just such a spectacular book. It is a heartbreaking, heartrending human story about coming to terms with age, love, loss, dissatisfaction with life, which comes through in just some really almost perfect dialogue and writing. But then it works as this, grander idea, as this statement, this critique of the shift that was happening in geopolitics at the time, as well as, a shift in American foreign policy. I went through the whole book thinking that it was written in the 1970s, because it was just so on the money, but it wasn't. It was published in 1958, and yet predicted with scary accuracy the American intervention into Vietnam and what America became in a post-Vietnam world. It's freakazoid, honestly. And I think that just comes from Graham Greene understanding people first and foremost. And so maybe there's a greater road to truth when you look at things from a human lens as opposed from just a purely sort of ideological lens. Which is to say that this book, in the hands of a lesser author, I think would be a very ham-fisted social and political critique, kind of like a lot of what you see in the 1960s and 1970s American literature. But the line that Graham Greene walks with The Quiet American is that it's an incredible human story, first and foremost, which just also so happens to be a fantastic skewering critique of European and American foreign policy. Number 3 is Don Carpenter's Hard Rain Falling. Tremendous book. I just reviewed it a couple weeks ago. Still fresh in my mind. Just a fantastic, fantastic book. It was really hard to choose between Hard Rain Falling and Stoner for this third spot, because they both were just absolute literary perfection. The reason that I chose Hard Rain Falling, though, is that it's unlike anything else that I've ever read. And why it's special is the same reason that The Quiet American is so special, in that it's really almost impossible to qualify what Hard Rain Falling is. Is it a crime novel? Is it a prison story? Is it a coming-of-age story? Yes, and no, and more. And that's something that Stoner didn't have. Stoner is a damn good book. Stoner is fantastic literature. Moving, it will make you cry. But it also doesn't have that sort of genre medium bending quality to it that Hard Rain Falling has. And also on another level, I mean, Stoner is very popular now. Stoner has achieved quite a level of recognition that Hard Rain Falling hasn't. And I think it behooves us all as readers to give it the credit that it's due. But to give the summary of Hard Rain Falling, which will do nothing to prepare you for what the book is and, you know, where the story ends up going. It starts in the late 1940s in Portland, Oregon, and follows this group of, you know, vagabond teenage pool hustlers as they live a life of, you know, petty crime. And then follows two of them in particular over the next 20 or so odd years in a story that touches everything from race relations in America to, you know, systemic shortcomings to homosexuality. It's a book whose scale is incomprehensibly large, even though on the surface it appears to be a pretty, like, narrow, close, tight character study of two people. Now, number two. Now, this one was really hard for me because it was going to be my number one book, but then I read something that just, you know, I read something else that just had to be number one. And I think it was like the only book that could knock this one into the second spot. So coming in at number two is A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. It is just an absolutely lovely little novella that is one of the most, like, emotionally charged and human books I've ever read. The book is about this psychologically damaged World War I soldier who now works as like an art restorer, as he spends a month in this old church in the British countryside to restore this mural of the Final Judgment. While in this little village, he meets, you know, the expected cast of eccentric country characters, but the pastoral life that he experiences and the time he spends with these people provides him the way to, as he says, no longer be a victim, and is a way that he's able to work through his own damage while cultivating the happiest moments of his life, even though they are all very bittersweet. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to really spoil anything, and I think this is something that every single one of you should read. It's something I'm going to be reading every year for the rest of my life at the end of summer. Incredibly moving little book. I think it's only like 110 pages long, and in those 110 pages, I hung on every word. I hung on every emotion, every feeling. It was just magical, like really magical. Yeah, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. Read it, buy it. That's really all there is to it. It is an amazing book. And it would have been number one if not for this next book. All right. Now, this next one is a book whose review I have been kicking the can down the road for like 3-4 months now, because I have like 40 pages of notes and I don't even know where to begin with it. It's a book that requires no real introduction, I don't think, but coming in as the number one best book that I read in 2022 is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, or The Evening Redness in the West. Yeah, where do you start with this? I mean, it's McCarthy's magnum opus. Published in 1985, it is equal parts Western and anti-Western, historical fiction, but not as fictional as you may think. Blood Meridian follows the Glanton Gang, a real-life gang of scalp hunters who gained a level of notoriety in the 1840s due to being particularly effective at harvesting Apache scalps, which they were contracted for by the various governors in Mexico at the time. But before long, after basking in a culture of lawlessness, they became a bloodthirsty gang of psychopaths, indiscriminately killing and scalping everybody: Mexicans, peaceful Indians, Apaches, before being declared an outlaw gang and having bounties taken out against them by the very governors who hired them to begin with. But to say that's what Blood Meridian is about is like saying that Moby Dick is about hunting a whale. Yeah, true, technically, but but that falls so short of the reality of it. Blood Meridian is a book that reaches for heights that no other book really reaches for, except maybe the Bible. It's been called scriptural and has attracted, study and attention from scholars in all levels of academia who dissect the book line for line, much like we do with the Bible or with, something like Inferno or Paradise Lost or Moby Dick, which is why I think that Blood Meridian is the current embodiment of the Western canon. I really do, which, sounds like grand overstating bullshit, but there is nothing else I've read like it. And it's so hard, if not impossible, to talk about Blood Meridian in a vacuum. I think, many of you have probably heard the quote, "Books are made of books." Couldn't be more true in the case of Blood Meridian. It is impossible to talk about Blood Meridian unless you can also talk about, Moby Dick, Paradise Lost, the Divine Comedy, the King James Bible, the Nag Hammadi, Gnostic Bible, to the same level of fidelity that you could talk about Blood Meridian about. It really does demand a wealth of knowledge to delve into. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that you can't just sit down and read it as a book. You definitely can. But if you haven't read it, I think that, if you start, you'll see that you're reading something that is special, because it will have you in one sentence just writhing around in the muck and the blood and the gore and the detritus of, man's inhumanity to man and violence like that. And then the very next sentence will serve you up with a reference to Wordsworth or Milton or something out of, classical art or literature. And all of this is there to bestow the text with a level of grandness that other authors just don't do. And that's what makes Blood Meridian so special. Because if you just look at it from its, plot, it's very monotonous. It's like the gang chases a group of Indians across the plain, collects scalps, goes back to town, gets driven out of town, gets chased across the plain, chases another Indian band across the plain, gets chased across the plain, stops in a town, gets chased out of a town. I think it's the same thing over and over again, but McCarthy finds a way to elevate the actions and everything you're seeing with a level of biblical importance, much like what Melville did in Moby Dick, and how he bestowed whaling with this timeless nobility, where when you read Moby Dick, it really does seem like taking to the sea and whaling is an extension of the most primal forces that drive humanity. It seems like a necessity when you read it. And that becomes very apparent at certain points in Blood Meridian, because any author could just, write that this gang is crossing the plain covered in dust, waiting, until they find water. McCarthy says it like this, though. "Spectre horsemen, pale with dust, anonymous in the crenellated heat. Above all else, they appeared wholly at venture, primal, provisional, devoid of order, like beings provoked out of the absolute rock and set nameless and at no remove from their own loomings, to wander ravenous and doomed and mute as gorgons shambling the brutal wastes of Gondwana land in a time before nomenclature was, and each was all." I mean, who writes like that? Who writes like that? Other than, Melville when Pip went down and almost drowned. It is just, and that's a quote that, stuck out to me, but the whole book is like that. Everything is a reference, even from the very first words. "See the kid. Call me Ishmael." Structurally, right? Just the structure of the book, the structure of sentences are references to other works. Blood Meridian may be the greatest book made from the greatest of other books. And it is just magical. It is important. It is unlike anything else you'll ever read. Um, of course, it's number one on this list. Of course. What else? What else could it be? Like, I mean, it's yeah. I it's also really hard to talk about because it's just you can spin and go off on tangents so easily with it. I know that whenever I get to that review, it's gonna be an hour and a half. I don't know. It'll be very long. Um, but yeah, Blood Meridian, number one book of 2022. So those were my top five of 2022. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on them and what your top five books are that you guys have read this year. So yeah, drop a like, comment, or a dislike and comment, all of that jazz. But in any case, I hope you are having a wonderful Christmas day and that the next time when we see each other in the new year that you're not too hungover. So yeah, bye.